Welcome to the Women Inspire Aspire podcast. In this episode, I talk to Bhargavi Rao about environment and livelihood of the underprivileged. Hi Bhargavi, thank you so much for accepting my invite to appear in the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Venkat, for inviting me for the podcast. I'm doing good.
It's a pleasure to have you in our podcast. You have a wide variety of experiences. So let's get started. Can you tell us a bit about your background? Where do you live? What do you do, etc.?
Sure. To kind of introduce myself, I work at the intersection of community action with law, policy, planning, governance, trying to bridge grassroots realities with all the decision making spaces. My work is like very broad. It spans research, advocacy, campaign, and also some teaching, all of which is aimed at advancing environmental and social justice in India and South Asia, I can say. To speak about my background itself, I did a master's in botany. My undergrad was in environmental science in Bangalore. During those days, we used to major in 3 subjects. So my 3 majors in my undergrad program was environmental science, chemistry, and botany. Unfortunately, at that time, there was no master's program in Bangalore in environmental science. So I did consider going to Pondicherry, but that was ecology. Very few options. So I landed up doing a master's in botany with a specialization in microbiology. Then I did a year of another master's program called MPhil, which was in another very botany related subject called aerobiology, where we studied the pollen and spores in the air and related that with the allergy and immunology. During those days, all the pollen studies that we did used to actually come in the Times of India newspaper, warning people as to which pollen is high in the air, and people who had allergic reactions, they could use that information and stay indoors or use masks and things like that. It was a very interesting course that I did. After my MPhil, I didn't want to do a PhD immediately, so I took up a job as a research assistant at the Indian Institute of Science in the Department of Microbiology and Cell Biology. The project there was again a very interesting project where we were trying to find a vaccine for rotavirus. Rotavirus causes diarrhea in neonates and it can be fatal in countries like ours. So at that time, it was a multi-lab project. Each lab was involved in a particular segment of this entire vaccine action program. We were doing that. It was a big team that was involved in it. What kind of struck me at that time was 2 years, I was deeply troubled. All the reagents came from the global north. It came either from Europe, US. Many of the instruments we used came from there. It was a very expensive project. Everybody used to be very tense during the course of that research. They didn't want to waste the reagents and waste time because we had to get timely results. At that time, I was also exposed to what a research life will be like, PhD and postdoc. And I saw my lab mates and department colleagues chasing papers and having sleepless nights over their experiments and all that. So at that point of time, a question kind of crept into my mind that in a country like India, to solve diarrhea, is vaccine an answer or access to clean drinking water? And that question troubled me for quite some time. I was really wondering if I am really prepared to spend the rest of my life sitting in a lab, running sequencing gels, doing those kind of experiments, writing papers. I felt that I'm not cut out for a life like that. I'm somebody who loves to be in the thick of the problems, understand it from all the people who are involved in it. And maybe I would not be part of truly finding the solution, but I really wanted to kind of be out there in the field, trying to understand and grasp everything. So that's when I actually gave up my job as a research assistant there, much to the shock of everybody, my family, friends and everybody. And I did do some teaching. I worked as a lecturer in botany in a local women's college, and then I also worked as a teacher. I taught geography and economics for 10th and 12th standard students. in a CBSE school. That was also a very interesting part. But soon, as luck would have it, if I can say, there was a workshop that was being conducted in Bangalore called Urban Environmental Challenges of Bangalore. And somebody passed a little leaflet to me which said, the workshop was a 3-day workshop. It was a residential workshop and it would be held at such and such a place. And this was a time when we didn't have cell phones and not everybody had emails and things like that. So I called up that number and I figured out a familiar name, and that name happened to be a classmate of mine. And we caught up and I'm like, oh, this workshop is very interesting. Can I participate in it? And I did participate. That kind of changed everything for me, because experientially visiting places where people suffered from lack of access to water, having no public health centers, having no facilities to store or filter water, being dependent on the short interval during which they got water throughout the week, meeting with planners and decision makers, for example, like the BWSSB, meeting with the BBMP. At that time, it was BMP. All of this helped me realize that maybe this is where I want to be. So I told my new friends and that team, saying that you guys are doing interesting work. I think I want to work with you all. But they said, oh, but we don't have money. We are a very young organization. We are trying our best to make ends meet. I said, it's okay. I'll volunteer for some time. And I did volunteer 2 years. Soon, became a part of the group. This group called Environment Support Group has been more than 25 years since they started the kind of work they were doing. It was initiated by my classmates. And that's how I got into this work. Since then, there has been no turning back, I can say. To explain a little bit more of the kind of work I've been doing over the last 25 years through this group. So we worked as a group who responded to local communities' struggles and people who were at risk. It could be pollution from industries that was reaching downstream and polluting their waters, or it could be landfill, it could be from mining, it could be threat from thermal power plant, a new thermal power plant which was sited in a place. So the communities would come to us and we would kind of assess the situation. It was like a legal clinic. We looked at it with clinical precision, where we brought in the little science we knew. We read and interpreted the law, worked with the communities to understand their challenges, learned a lot from the communities themselves because their knowledge was far ahead of where we were actually many a time, and then helped them resolve these issues in various ways, from meeting the local decision makers, planners, local governments, pollution control boards. We've also not shied from going to court, and in many a case, judicial interventions have helped. So this has been the kind of journey over the last 25 years. Looking back, it's been a variety of landscapes, a variety of cases, a variety of interventions, and understanding the local geographies, the cultures, the people, their languages. That's been a fascinating experience.
Wow. Can you go through a couple of projects that specifically you think have made a huge difference in people's lives in all the work that you have mentioned?
I'll be happy to walk you through a few and explain 2 of them in detail. When I started this journey in the heart of the Western Ghats, where 3 rivers originate, the Tungabadra and Netravati, there was iron ore mining that was happening. And that iron ore mining was to expand. It would have expanded to the region where these 3 rivers originate. So we worked with the local communities, understood their challenges, understood the landscape, looked at what was in the law. It was a very complex case because at that point of time, the region was declared as a national park. Once a region is declared as a national park, people living in the national park obviously cannot live there anymore. They have to move out. So we understood the complexity of the problem. Eventually, of course, because of the intervention of another group, mining came to a close there. But that gave me an understanding of what a forest like the Western Ghats is and what people there are like and their relationship with nature. The entire symbiotic way in which they lived with the forest. So I learned a lot from there. And then following that, we had the Bangalore-Mysore infrastructure corridor project that was coming up at that time. We had to quickly prepare for the environmental public hearings that was to take place in 5 cities across Bangalore and Mysore. First one was held in Bangalore. So reading through the EIAs, understanding how EIAs are done, who makes these EIAs, how is it made accessible, what does it actually cover, and what should it cover? These were questions that we learned to ask and read and interpret the EIA both to the local communities and understand the many missing links in the EIAs. An example of another kind of a work. Of course, with the Bangalore-Mysore infrastructure corridor, we also conducted surveys in some 170 odd villages which were listed for acquisition. There were a lot of litigations and eventually only the peripheral road got done, but not the main expressway itself. So that again gave me an understanding of what happens when such infrastructure projects are cited and laid out without consultation with local farming communities. And most of the time, it is the small and marginal farmers who are affected the most, because once their land is gone, their livelihood is gone, and without that livelihood, they have no alternative ways to kind of cope with life. So that was another piece of work that we did for some time. Soon after that, we also looked at thermal power projects that were proposed near the Kabini River in Chamalapura. We worked on that. Then we also looked at the impacts of the Raichur thermal power plant and the communities that were affected by it. We worked in Raichur and Bangalore on the solid waste management issue, where we worked with the local government, the city municipal corporation, trained the local Paurakarmikas, that is the solid waste workers, and we also worked with the self-help groups in Raichur, training them on how waste has to be segregated at source and the need for reducing the non-biodegradables like plastic and others. So it was around the same time that a local community not very far from where I live now in Bangalore. I live in Banshankari. This is in very close to Yalahanka in a place called Mavalipura. The local communities were affected by the illegal dumping of the city's waste on their common lands. And their water was polluted, their soil was polluted, they could no longer continue their agro-pastoral work. And they had come to us asking if we could help them in any which way possible. That's when we did a series of field visits, series of water analysis of the well water, the bore well water. We did health surveys of the local villages, and we put all this information together, tried our best to dialogue with all the concerned authorities, somehow managed to use the provisions of the Water Act. We worked with the local community so that they could use the provisions of the Water Act and get the first landfill shut down. But soon after, another landfill was opened very close by. That again repeated the same problem. And it went on till about 2012. And in 2012, the local community just couldn't handle it. In more than 5 villages were affected. This became a big issue. And what is very important about this particular issue is Bangalore always boasts of being a science city, a tech city with all the IT-BT. Very sadly, with all the science in the city, with all the technology that is available, we did not get our water management right. We did not get our waste management right. Not that we've got our housing and mobility and other things, but to pollute somebody else's water and cause health problems to those people, that I think all of us are responsible, and it is criminal of us to have even done that. And what is remarkable is these villages, which are predominantly Dalit villages, they stood up and said, enough, we are not going to take any more of Bangalore's waste. And that's when the story began, and it went on for a very long time. In fact, the case is still in court, but the High Court of Karnataka did give some fantastic orders, a bunch of interim orders and then a final order where it said that waste has to be segregated at source. We should not have landfills, and it also said no to burning of waste, and it ensured that assessed the amount of waste it was producing. This was like a remarkable case, and soon after that, Bangalore started segregating its waste, and everybody, every neighborhood, all the elite neighborhoods, people were talking about segregating waste, composting waste, and sending waste to the recyclable centers. Today, it is because of that Dalit village and two leaders from that Dalit village, one Mr. Srinivas and one Mr. Ramesh. It is because of them that Bangalore at least has some 30 to 40% of its waste being segregated and composted and going to some dry waste collection centers and going to the respective recyclable industries. That case is a very important story for me and something that is very close to my heart, because that is a case where we worked systematically. We conducted water analysis regularly. We met with the local communities. We have conducted several surveys, health surveys, agriculture related surveys, their livelihood related studies. So that was a very comprehensive piece of work, and that's a story that needs to be told. And in fact, just last year, film was made with a very small grant from Swissnex, and the name of the film is Waste and the City, made by Teapoy Films. Teapoy Film made a brilliant piece of work out of this story, because it's a 20-year-old story, and they captured all of that like in a 28-minute film, and the story is narrated very well. And I would urge everybody listening to this podcast to watch that short film, because that is a story that needs to be told, because it really awakens you to what is happening in the city. Waste management is it's just not dry waste and wet waste and things like that. Waste management lies at the intersection of caste, class, religion, and more. We need to understand that. So that's a story I really love. Then we also work in central Karnataka, where a large chunk of grasslands, which was referred to as the Amrit Mahal Kaval, was diverted to form a science city. The diversion happened in a very unscientific way though, because grasslands are also referred to as open natural ecosystems. Grasslands typically don't have trees. They just have a variety of grasses and some herbs and some shrubs. Grasslands are very important because they support a very unique kind of a ecosystem. In central Karnataka, the Chitradurga-Chalkere region, this land was home to the black buck, the great Indian bustard, the lesser florican, and it also supported local agro-pastoral work, predominantly what is referred to as the Amrit Mahal Kaval cattle and the Deccani sheep. India is the largest producer of meat and milk, and in a situation like that, the agro-pastoral life that countries like India lead, this is not industrial farming. They live in perfect harmony with nature. They are not connected to the grid. Flock size can be anything from 5 to 10 sheep to people having 500 sheep. Many of them are nomadic in nature. They move from farm to farm, fertilizing the farmer's land, and in return they get some paddy and ragi or something which they use as food, and then they come back home. And during the summer months, the wool of the Deccani sheep is sheared. The women folk make the yarn, and the men weave it into a blanket. These are pit looms, and they weave it into a blanket. The blankets are very famously called, in Karnataka it is called the Chalkere Kamli, in Andhra it is referred to as the Gongadi, and it is a very unique kind of blanket because the shepherding community, they use this blanket throughout the year. It protects them from rain because the material is water resistant. It doesn't soak up the water. Water runs down when they put it on their head. It keeps them warm during winter, and it keeps them cool during the summer months when they walk long distances in the hot sun. And for the local community, these grasslands were everything. They worshipped it. They had protected it since time immemorial. They themselves had never encroached it, and they had their places of worship, and many of their places of worship are animistic belief places, with stones and trees and things like that. And they have a very unique set of festivals which relate to Birappa, who they refer to as the god of the grasslands, and then Gauramma is the female deity of the grasslands. They have a unique set of festivals related to these gods and goddesses, and the way they celebrate it. They also sing in a very unique language, which is like a mixture of Telugu, Kannada, some Marathi words shepherd in it. That probably also reflects, the nomadic nature of the shepherding communities. So such a beautiful system was wiped out when the Science City was declared in this place. And we worked with the local communities. More than 70 to 80 villages around were directly affected by this project. All the villages did not know anything else. They only knew agro-pastoral work. So soon after this coming, of course, it was challenged at the National Green Tribunal. The National Green Tribunal did give an order. It was not an order completely in favor of the project or completely in favor of the local community, but it ensured that certain processes would be followed before the projects came up. But, in a country like India, some big institutions hardly ever follow the law and the rule and the court orders. So anyway, the city did come up, the Science City did come up, and these 70 odd villages lost their land and their livelihood. So when I say land, it was not their private land, it was their land of their livelihood. So these pastoral communities had to completely shut down all their activities. There was distress sale. Many of the youth migrated out. Only the senior citizens stayed back. It is a very sad story. But to me, it was a story in which we all gave our best. We did not leave any leaf unturned to ensure that that land would be saved and those livelihoods would survive. Because in the context of climate change, you obviously don't want livelihoods that are connected to the grid. You obviously don't want more emissions. And these were livelihoods that were perfectly off the grid and self-sustained, and they were not exploiting any one particular resource beyond what they needed. But in the name of progress and development, this is what happens. So this is a story again very close to my heart. And again, there is another beautiful film called Birappa's Angst. And I would urge all people listening to this podcast, watch that film. That's again a half an hour film which narrates this particular story. And it also highlights why grasslands are important, how we have systematically lost grasslands. If you actually think it is the grasses that feed the world today, about 11 to 12 varieties of grasses is what provides us our staple food. So grasses are very important. So I would urge all of our listeners to watch this film. It's again on YouTube. I had this wonderful opportunity to also work in Odisha project where there was a captive mining, a port, a steel plant, all plonked together in a village called Jagat Singhpur, where people depended on the local land to grow betel vines. The famous Banarasi pan is actually grown there. The betel vines that grow there become the Banarasi pan that we all love to eat. So it was this community that again struggled very hard. They put up a very long resistance, but other agencies have come in and the massive project seems to be going on in bits and pieces. But what is important is working with those communities, understanding that particular landscape. We also managed to write a report which was again used in court, and that issue was also addressed in the Odisha High Court. So that was another great learning experience. So similarly, we also helped communities in Nagaland who were affected by the prospecting of a oil well, the oil that was overflowing, the hills were catching fire, the water was getting polluted. So we kind of helped them in addressing the issue. It was a judicial intervention where we had to go to the Guwahati High Court and get them some relief. So we basically helped in research and understanding the issue, providing enough evidence to be able to go to court. So similarly, we've also helped communities in Manipur, particularly the communities who reside on the Loktak Lake, another very unique ecosystem. Fishing communities live on floating vegetation called pumdis. They fish for a living, come to the land, sell their fish and exchange it for other materials like lentils or rice or something and row their way back into their homes. In fact, it has received as the most sustainable habitat award recognition from the UN Habitat Center. That again was a remarkable learning experience, I can say. While we may have helped them in a very small way, but what we learned remains with me forever. So this has been like a dipstick of the kind of work I have done, reading a variety of the environment impact assessment reports of various projects, flagging the loopholes in it, bringing it to the attention of the concerned authorities, the courts. And we also did a lot of work in Bangalore itself. The way the city is growing, some things had to be addressed. For example, our lakes were getting privatized and we had to again get judicial intervention to ensure that lakes are not privatized, rented, leased or sold. And that particular lake order today protects about 40,000 lakes in Karnataka itself, not just Bangalore. So that was another remarkable study that we did when it comes to lakes. Who manages these lakes? Who managed it in the past? What is the structure and what is the ecosystem of a lake like? We got into the nitty-gritties of it. We worked with local communities in and around lakes. That was what helped us do that piece of work. We also looked at all the tree felling and road widening that was happening in Bangalore. The construction of the metro itself, that was also challenged because in a city like Bangalore, you cannot be bulldozing a city which has so much history just because you want the metro line. So that was also challenged, saying that it needs a rethinking and a reimagining. So this has broadly been the kind of work I have done. To share a little bit more about what I'm currently doing, now in the name of climate change, we are unfolding solar parks everywhere across the country. Solar parks are land intensive. Solar and wind are land intensive. And Karnataka boasts of having the fourth largest solar power plant. But it has come at a huge cost of local communities. A large chunk of the land comes from the small and marginal farmers. To an outsider, it all looks very clean and green, but obviously it is not, because at the end of the day, the farmer who leases his land just gets about 21,000 rupees per acre per annum. Most of these farmers are people who have just 2 or 3 acres, and that is hardly enough to run a family of 4, right? Whereas if you look at the alternatives of where you can have farming and pastoral activity under the solar park, that is a good option because they can continue to do what they are currently doing. That's an area I've been focusing, looking at the solar parks that are coming up in Koppal, that have come up in Chamarajnagar. I've also been fact-finding committee member of a study of a solar park that happened in Assam, in a place called Nagaon district, in a village called Mikir, where grant land that was given by the government to the poorest of the poor was snatched away to install a solar park. This is an area that I've been watching, seeing, writing about, so that somewhere we will be able to address this. If we understand the fact that we promised 500 gigawatts of renewable energy, right? And renewable energy is a function of the panchayat under the provisions of the Constitution, the 73rd, 74th Amendment that came in 1992. So there is something called the 11th schedule and the 12th schedule. So if we read the 11th schedule, it has some 29 odd subjects for the panchayats to take care of, and one of it is non-conventional energy. Panchayats should have had the first say in unfurling the renewable energy park, whether it's solar or wind or hybrid or geothermal or whatever. But instead, we are snatching our land from the rural areas and giving it to big corporations to develop the solar parks and produce solar energy and wind energy. This is also in the background of the Land Acquisition Act, with all its fair amendments, has been put in cold storage. It is hardly ever used because the process is long drawn and it's difficult to take it up. So no state is using the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act. Instead, every state, everywhere, you see that land is being taken on a lease method, particularly for building utility scale solar parks. And these are huge. Pavagada, for example, is 13,000 acres and today it is around 21,000 acres. In 13,000 acres, you would expect at least 13,000 jobs. Unfortunately, 13,000 acres supports only 2,000 jobs in the solar park. So it takes away the local livelihood. And the COVID pandemic taught us so much. At the end of the day, people who walked back to their villages, unfortunately, many didn't make it, but those who did go back, they went back to these livelihoods. They do a bunch of things over a year, and that is what sustains them. That is what put food on their table. We could have learned from that and focused more attention on reviving all these possibilities. Instead, there is very little being done at the village level. Skill building is zero, I can say. We continue to unfold solar parks. So that's an area I've been looking at, particularly how it is impacting women, children, because in Koppal, there's already been cases of child marriage, maternal mortality, and infant mortality. These families are so poor, there is no food at the household level. Giving that child away in marriage is only because they feel that the child will get a meal. And that child's body is not ready for a reproductive life cycle. If she is giving birth to a baby, it's definitely at the risk of her life or the baby's life. And that's exactly what's happening in Koppal, and this is not what I am saying. News reports are saying that. These are issues that I love to flag and I love to talk about. This has been an area where I have been working over the last year or more, I can say.
I would like to bring your attention to something very important, which is the data centers that are being built to support artificial intelligence. Recently, there was an announcement of a big corporate setting up their data center in Visakhapatnam. These data centers consume so much energy, which is so much higher than the energy that's consumed by our regular users in residential and industrial purposes. Solar or other means won't be able to generate these amounts of energy, so nuclear plants become necessary. Along with that is the necessity of cooling of the data centers, which requires water. If these data centers are near the ocean, the water requirement could be managed, but if the data centers are located inland, it would be a big problem for the groundwater. Today, governments are looking at data for their country not leaving their lands because of privacy and security reasons. That makes it really difficult for our data to reside anywhere else. What are your thoughts on this? Are you planning anything on these lines?
Although I've not worked directly on it, but for reading bits and pieces of news that's coming in, yes, we are already in a place across the country where water security is threatened. City after city has issues during the summer months, and there are threats like what we see in Bangalore, saying that many of the companies want to move away from Bangalore. One, for the reason that there is no water during summer, and in rainy season it's all flooded. So given this situation, I don't think our city and state governments are really thinking hard on where we are going to get water from, at what cost the water will come. They only look at the investments that are coming in, and they promise the water, the electricity, and all of it. From experience, we know that these data centers eventually will probably get the water or the electricity that they want, or even the land that they want, because we've seen that happening in Bangalore and Chennai and Hyderabad, where city governments are luring all these investors and these centers to come up because they think having these centers and having all of this is it's a feather in their own crown. But the sad part is water that is a right to the local communities, the poorest of the poor communities, that is where it will be snatched away from. Again, looking at what's happening in the electricity scenario, it is not that we have said no to coal. We are allocating more and more blocks of forest everywhere. I don't see that as a threat to the data centers, but it is definitely a threat to the poorest of the poor communities. It could be farming communities, it could be communities living in cities, the migrant communities who are settlers. 30% or more of Bangalore is low-income neighborhoods. These are not seen at all. They are all covered under facades, and they are lying behind all the glass-covered panel buildings. So that is where the water scarcity is very high. If you understand ward by ward the scenario, the poorest communities in every ward are the ones who don't have water today. They don't even have electricity. While two roads across, if there is a elite community, a political leader, those roads will never see power shutdowns or water supply stopped even for an hour. That is how city and state governments will balance it out. More power gadas will probably unfurl. Koppal, what has happened is the Karnataka Netravati Nigam Limited has been working on irrigation projects for several years, and some of the irrigation projects are almost at the doorstep of these farming communities. And then today the farming communities are lured, saying that give your land away for solar, because solar power doesn't cause any harm to your land and you can lease it or you can sell the land to the developer. And that is how people are being moved away from farming. The way decisions are being taken today, we are dodging all the due processes. We have all the laws in place, but we also know how to dodge them, and that is how these decisions are made, and somebody will bear the brunt of it.
Thank you so much for sharing your views. We have talked a lot about your work. Let's talk about your hobbies and interests that you pursue apart from your work.
I grew up in a home where we had a beautiful garden. My childhood is filled with memories of the different flowering plants, the fruiting trees that we had in the backyard. I think I developed a lot of gardening interest from that. Although I live in an apartment today, my 3 balconies are filled with plants. I'm often gambling with the sun because there is very little sunlight that actually comes inside the balconies. But even then, I try my hard to grow all kinds of plants. There was a point in time where I had an avocado tree, a curry leaf tree in my balcony. That's what keeps me sane. I also like music. So I listen to a lot of music. I grew up with a lot of classical music at home, both Carnatic and Hindustani. So I listen to a lot of music. I also started learning. I did learn as a child, being in South India, being in Bangalore, you tend to be trained in all of this. I had given it up since high school. During COVID, I restarted learning music. So I do a lot of music. I like going out on nature trails and being in nature. Not that I can identify all the birds, but I just like to try. Those are skills we picked up in our undergrad course. Bird watching was something we did regularly. Compared to my other friends, I'm not very great in identifying birds, but still I do try and do that. This is what keeps me going.
Thanks for sharing that. Apart from environment, do you have any societal issues that you care about?
I do look at issues, particularly in a city like Bangalore. It is becoming very unsafe for everybody, and particularly for women and children. So that's an area I'm constantly watching out, and I do attend some of the events organized by organizations that work on these issues. I do like experiential education, so I also like to take children out and talk to them and show things to them as they are, get them engaged in some of the issues that are happening in our city. It could be anything from helping them see how a road is, how safe is it. So if we could get them to plan what would they want on a road, on a street, on a footpath. So these are dialogues I love to have with children. I do try and spend time with children now and then, wherever possible.
Okay, great. What advice would you like to give to the general public in terms of activism or awareness about issues that you have mentioned already? Do you have any tips on how to approach these issues?
I think one is to be updated with the newspapers. Not that all the newspapers are doing a great job today, but at least seeing what they are reporting, seeing if the news that we are reading is balanced, having a curiosity to learn more about the issues and not take things at face value, digging a little deeper, because at the end of the day, it is the city where we live. It is the water that comes to us. It is housing that concerns us. It is the street that concerns us. Unless we engage with these issues, we engage with the decision makers. You can't expect decision makers to give everything on a pallet. To be engaged, one has to be informed. Accessing information, participating in whatever forums possible, public forums possible, engaging at the ward level with our own ward committees whenever they are formed. Of course, now we don't have ward committees, but hopefully with the new GBA, things will fall in place. So working in our own neighborhoods, that's again something that the COVID pandemic taught us, because help was finally available in our own neighborhoods. So if we can all be involved at our own neighborhood level on various issues, not just the resources we consume, but also having a dialogue about what's happening in the country today, what's happening around us. Is everybody safe? And particularly at the intersection of caste, class, religion, language, literacy, able-bodied condition, and being disabled, how inclusive are spaces? Those are areas that everybody takes interest. We can definitely make this a beautiful world.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time appearing in our podcast and sharing your views. I wish you all the best in your life and whatever you are aspiring to do.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And this is very inspiring. I think you're doing a great service to the society. And particularly if you are highlighting women's work and women's voices, this is such a beautiful way to empower women.
Please take care and bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good luck to you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was a great podcast with Bhargavi Rao. Please subscribe to this channel and follow it for more awesome podcasts. Opinions expressed by the guests in this podcast are their own. The host or the sponsors of the podcast do not condone the opinions expressed by the guests or the actions arising out of those opinions. Any decisions or actions that the listeners might take as a result of listening to this podcast must be based on their own judgment and will be at their own risk. The podcast host or their sponsors will not be held responsible for the consequences of any actions and or decisions taken as a result of any content in this podcast.